The ocean doesn't roar down here. It presses. A crushing, patient weight that makes metal groan like it's alive. Jonas Taylor feels remembered by the dark, like the trench knows him. Knows his heartbeat. The sub's lights carve thin tunnels through black water, and for a moment, everything feels calm. Too calm. Jonas tightens his grip, jaw set, because the last time the sea went quiet like this, something massive was moving. Years after surviving the impossible, Jonas now works with Mana 1, an oceanic research outpost floating above secrets no one should touch. The mission is simple on paper. Explore a newly discovered section of the Mariana Trench. Gather data. Come back alive. But simple is a lie people tell themselves before things go wrong. Around him, scientists chatter through comms, voices steady, professional. Jing, brilliant and eager, watches the readouts like a kid staring into a forbidden room. Jonas watches the water. He's learned which one deserves fear. The trench opens beneath them like a wound. Rock walls drop away into nothing, ancient and scarred, as if something huge has been scraping through for centuries. Instruments spike, then stabilize. Pressure levels rise. The sub creaks again. Jonas feels it in his bones, that old instinct screaming. This place isn't empty. It never was. The ocean doesn't waste space. Above them, Mana 1 hums with activity. DJ laughs too loudly, masking nerves. Matt cracks a joke that lands flat. There's money riding on this mission. Corporate eyes watching every move. Proof that the ocean can be tamed, packaged, sold. Jonas doesn't buy it. You don't tame something that can swallow cities. You just survive it, if you're lucky. Then the sensors flicker. Just for a second. A blip. Gone. Jing leans closer, fingers flying. Probably interference, he says, convincing himself more than anyone else. Jonas doesn't answer. His breath slows. Interference doesn't feel like that. That felt like being looked at. They push deeper. The water grows thicker, darker, almost oily. The lights catch movement at the edge of vision. Not fast, not aggressive. Curious. 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 Jonas remembers the megalodon's eye. Ancient and intelligent, the way it didn't rush. Predators at the top never hurry. His chest tightens. He told himself there was only one. Nature doesn't repeat mistakes like that. Except when it does. A sudden tremor shudders through the sub. Alarms chirp, soft but urgent. Hull integrity drops a fraction. DJ's laughter dies instantly. Silence stretches, heavy as the water outside. Then the tremor stops. No impact. No debris, just gone. Jonas swallows. Something brushed them. Not collided. Brushed. Testing. Back on Mana 1, monitors show unexplained pressure waves rippling outward. The trench is reacting. Corporate supervisors argue about aborting versus pushing forward. Data versus lives. The usual math. Theirs is lives. The usual math. Jonas cuts through it with one sentence. We're not alone down here. The channel goes quiet. No one wants to hear that again. As if summoned, the water ahead parts. The lights reveal scars in the rock. Massive gouges running parallel, fresh enough to still shed stone. Jing's voice drops to a whisper. That's bigger than before. Jonas doesn't correct him. Bigger isn't the problem. More is. Far below, something moves. Slow. Enormous. Too large for the light to hold all at once. A shadow within a shadow. Jonas feels the old fear rise, sharp and familiar, but layered now with something worse. Realization. This isn't a survivor. It's a population. The trench wasn't a prison. It was a nursery. It was a nursery. The shadow turns, just enough for a single eye to catch the light, and the sub's alarms erupt as pressure spikes violently, like the ocean itself just inhaled. Jonas whispers the truth no one wants to hear. There's more than one. The alarms don't scream. They pulse. Slow. Measured. Like a heartbeat that doesn't belong to any human on board. Red light washes over Jonas's face as the sub drifts, powerless for half a breath too long. He's felt this pause before. That moment when the ocean decides whether you're worth killing yet. His fingers hover near the controls. Don't panic. Panic makes noise. Noise gets you noticed. Power fluctuation, Jing says. Too fast. I can reroute. His hands shake anyway. The screens show pressure climbing, not crushing yet, but leaning in. Curious. Testing limits. Jonas leans forward, eyes fixed on the dark beyond the glass. The shadow is gone. That's worse. You can't track what you can't see. Mana 1 crackles through the comms, voices overlapping. Abort. Proceed. Data integrity. Investor confidence. Jonas cuts in again, voice low, edged with something final. You keep us down here, you lose the sub. Silence follows. Not agreement. Calculation. Finally, clearance to ascend. Too late. The water moves. Not fast. Not like an attack. The lights catch a wall of flesh sliding past, scales the size of truck doors, scars layered over scars like history written in wounds. The sub is nothing beside it. A toy drifting near a god. DJ swears over the channel. Mac goes quiet. Jing forgets to breathe. Then the tail passes. The pressure wave slams into them, spinning the sub hard. Metal shrieks. One monitor dies. Another fractures into static. Jonas slams a stabilizer, muscles screaming as the sub rights itself just enough. Up. Now. Thrusters roar, straining against water that suddenly feels alive, pushing back. Above them, Mana 1 shakes as shockwaves ripple upward. Coffee spills. People stumble. Security grabs railings, eyes wide as sensors light up across the board. Not one contact. Multiple. Moving. Coordinated. The trench is emptying. The sub claws its way higher, but the ocean doesn't let go easily. Something clips them from below, not a bite. A warning. Hull integrity drops again. DJ's voice cracks. Jonas, we can't take another hit. Jonas knows. He's already counting seconds, angles, currents. He spots a narrow rock shelf ahead, barely visible. A gamble. He takes it. They skim the rock. Sparks dancing as metal kisses stone. The sub shudders, then steadies. The darkness settles again, heavier now, offended. For a breath, nothing happens. Then, the sensors explode with motion. Shapes moving in from multiple vectors. Smaller than the first. Faster. Juveniles, Jing whispers, horror and awe tangled together. Jonas doesn't correct him. Juvenile doesn't mean harmless. It means hungry. One darts into the light, jaws snapping shut inches from the viewport. Teeth like white knives. The impact throws the sub sideways. Jonas grits his teeth, forces control back. Hold together, he mutters. To the sub. To himself. Another shadow streaks past. Another. They're circling. Learning. Mana. One orders emergency countermeasures. Sonar pings blast downward, violent pulses meant to disorient. The water screams back. The juveniles scatter, but not far. The big one doesn't move at all. It doesn't need to. It already knows where they are. Fuel drops. Time compresses. Every decision feels heavier. Jonas spots an opening, a thermal vent column rising like smoke. Heat distortion. Cover. He dives the sub straight through it. The sudden temperature shift confuses the sensors. For a moment, the ocean loses them. They burst out into clearer water, rising fast now. Mana 1 looms above, lights blazing, arms extended like a lifeline. Cheers start on the comms, shaky, premature. Jonas doesn't celebrate. He's learned better. The water below bulges, not breaks, bulges. Like something massive pushing against the surface of the world. The first meg breaches partially, its back arching just enough to remind them how small safe really is. The juveniles swarm beneath it, dark shapes slicing through blue. Mana 1's defenses engage. Explosions ripple. Water churns. The sub slams into its docking bay hard enough to knock the air from Jonas's lungs. Doors seal. Pressure equalizes. For a second, it feels like survival. Then the facility shutters again, harder this time. Warning lights cascade across Mana 1. Structural stress. Multiple breaches. Something hits the lower supports with deliberate force. Not random. Strategic. Jonas looks at the screens, at the shapes below, and a cold truth settles in. They aren't just escaping the trench, they're being followed. Mana 1 groans like a wounded animal. Metal beams complain. Lights flicker, then stabilize, bathing the interior in a sickly white glow. Jonas staggers out of the sub as crew rush past him, boots slapping steel floors slick with spilled water and hydraulic fluid. The smell hits first. Salt, ozone, something burning. Not a good combination. Not offshore. Not this far from help. Seal the lower decks, someone yells. Too late. The facility lurches again, a deliberate shove from below. Jonas grabs a railing, knuckles white, mind racing through angles and force vectors. That wasn't a ram. That was placement. Whatever's down there is learning the structure, learning where it hurts. Jing catches up to him, eyes wide behind fogged lenses. They're coordinating, he says, voice low. The juveniles are driving pressure toward the supports. The adult. He stops, swallows. The adult is waiting. Jonas nods. That tracks. Apex predators don't waste energy. They let panic do the work. On the command deck, corporate supervisors argue again. Evacuation pods versus asset protection. Loss mitigation charts flash across screens like they matter. Jonas slams a palm onto the table. The room goes quiet. Those things don't care about your investments. You make noise, you light up the water, you die. Simple. Simple never means easy. Another impact. A lower-level camera feed bursts into static, then clears just long enough to show a juvenile Meg scraping along the hull, teeth clicking against reinforced steel. Not biting through. Not yet. Testing thickness. The screen cuts out. Someone vomits quietly into a bin. They deploy countermeasures. Depth charges, sonar bursts, anything to create distance. The ocean answers with violence. One charge detonates too close, sending a shockwave that cracks a viewing panel. Water seeps in, thin at first, then faster. Jonas feels the time squeeze tighter. Facilities fail like bodies. One system at a time. Then, all at once. DJ pulls Jonas aside, voice shaking. Escape pods can't outrun them. Jonas knows. Pods are prey-sized. He looks at the schematics, eyes locking onto the maintenance tunnels running along the underside. Narrow. Shielded. Quiet. We don't outrun, he says. We hide. DJ stares. Hiding from megalodons sounds like a joke. Jonas doesn't smile. They move fast. Alarms muted. Power rerouted. Crew squeezes into the tunnels, backs scraping metal, breath loud in the dark. The facility shudders again, closer now, as if the adult is pressing its weight against Mana 1, just to feel it respond. Jonas feels it through the soles of his boots. A deep, resonant thrum. Satisfaction. In the tunnels, silence takes on a shape. Every clang feels like a gunshot. Someone drops a tool. It echoes forever. Jonas freezes the group with a raised fist. Wait. Count heartbeats, nothing follows. Yet, they keep moving. Suddenly, the water outside goes still. No impacts, no pressure waves. Worse. Jonas knows this pattern. Stillness means decision. The adult Meg peels away from the structure, shadow sliding across the last working external cam. It swims out of sight, slow and unbothered. Where is it going? Jing whispers. Jonas doesn't answer because the answer arrives a second later. A new alarm. Hull breach, not from outside, from below. Something has gone under the facility, using the juveniles to force stress fractures. The adult isn't attacking Mana 1 anymore. It's collapsing it. Water floods the lower decks violently now, ripping doors off hinges. The structure twists. Emergency lights die. Darkness swallows corridors. Jonas shoves the crew forward as water surges behind them, cold and relentless. They burst into a pod bay just as a bulkhead slams shut, cutting off the flood by inches. They don't celebrate. The bay shakes. Pods rattle in their clamps. Jonas watches the water through a cracked viewport. Shapes move below, purposeful. The juveniles circle like knives. The adult hovers beneath them all, vast and patient. Jiuming's voice breaks. It's not just hunting us. Jonas finally says what he's been avoiding. No, it's teaching them. How to break structures. How to trap prey. How to wait. The ocean isn't reacting anymore. It's planning. The pod bay lights flicker, then drop to emergency red, the color of blood, of warnings no one listens to until it's too late. Jonas stands still while everyone else breathes too fast, too loud. Panic has a sound. Out there, in the water, something hears everything. Manawan is dying in pieces now. A slow, deliberate death. The adult Meg circles beneath the crippled facility, its massive silhouette drifting in and out of sensor range like a bad thought you can't shake. It doesn't rush. It doesn't strike. It waits. And that waiting is the message. Jiming finally says it. It's not random behavior. His voice trembles, not from fear, but from the weight of understanding. This isn't instinct. Jonas looks at him, sees the shift. The scientist is gone. Something harder is forming. No, Jonas agrees. This is strategy. A new feed blinks alive on a cracked monitor. One of the deep-sea drones, dislodged during the collapse, still transmitting. The camera shakes violently, tumbling through black water. Then it steadies. The image that fills the screen drains the room of sound. More Megs. Not two. Not three. A cluster of massive forms moving together, juveniles weaving between them like escorts. Different sizes. Different scars. A hierarchy. A pod. The trench wasn't hiding a monster. It was hiding a species. Corporate control shatters in that moment. Orders stop coming. There's nothing to order. Evacuation becomes survival math with no good answers. Pods can't outrun them. The surface won't save them. Jonas feels the old weight settle in his chest. The knowledge that once the ocean decides, human plans mean nothing. Another tremor hits. Hard. The pod clamps fail on one side. A capsule drops into the water, alarm screaming. The screen catches its descent for 2 seconds before a shadow surges upward. One snap of jaws. Static. Gone. No one speaks. DJ's hands curl into fists. Someone sobs. Jonas closes his eyes for half a second. He opens them sharper. We move. Now. He points to the remaining pods. Stagger launch. Kill lights. No sonar. We sink first, then drift. It's insane. It's the only move left. As they strap in, Jiming hesitates. Jonas, if they're teaching, he doesn't finish. Jonas finishes it for him. Then they're learning faster than we can. A beat. Which means we end this before it reaches the surface. Jiming looks at him. Realizes what that means. Someone has to draw them away. Someone has to be loud. The pod releases. Silence replaces alarms. The ocean wraps around them, heavy and cold. They sink, lights off, trusting darkness for once. Jonas watches through the viewport as Mana 1 finally gives up. The structure folds inward, collapsing in a slow-motion implosion that sends debris raining down like snow. The Megs move instantly. The pod shudders as pressure waves pass nearby. Shapes streak through black water. They aren't confused. They aren't searching. They're hurting. A massive form slides beneath Jonas's pod, so close the viewport darkens completely. For a moment, there is nothing but scale and scar and ancient eye. The Meg doesn't attack. It turns slightly, guiding the pod's descent with its body like a wall. Jonas exhales slowly. This isn't a hunt anymore. It's a capture. The pod sinks until time loses meaning. No engines. No sound. Just the slow creak of pressure settling in like a hand around the throat. Jonas floats with it, counting breaths, forcing his pulse down. Around him, the others cling to straps in silence, eyes wide, afraid to move in case movement itself becomes a signal. Outside the viewport, darkness thickens, broken only by distant shadows sliding past with terrible patience. They aren't rushing anymore. The Megs drift alongside, matching speed without effort. Juveniles dart ahead, then fall back, like scouts reporting to something larger. Jonas watches the choreography and feels a cold certainty harden inside him. This isn't curiosity. This is containment. They're being guided somewhere. The seabed emerges beneath them, jagged rock and torn sediment swirling in slow spirals. Ahead, the trench opens again, wider than before, like a mouth that never closes. Thermal plumes rise in ghostly columns, turning the water hazy. The Megs steer the pod toward it, massive bodies creating invisible walls. Jonas realizes the truth too late. This is where they teach. The pod jolts as it settles onto a rocky shelf. No attack, no violence, just placement. The Megs circle once, then pull back into the dark, leaving the pod alone at the edge of the abyss. For the first time since launch, Jonas hears someone breathe too loud. He doesn't stop them. Fear needs air. Jing breaks the silence. They brought us here on purpose. Jonas nods. This is their territory. Their classroom. The implication hangs heavy. Whatever happens next isn't about feeding. Whatever happens next isn't about feeding. It's about knowledge. About learning how humans behave when cornered. A low-frequency vibration rolls through the water, felt more than heard. The juveniles respond instantly, snapping to attention, forming a loose ring around the pod. Then the adult arrives. It rises from below, colossal, scarred, its presence bending the water around it. The Meg doesn't charge. It stops just short of the viewport, eye rotating, studying. Jonas meets its gaze, heart hammering. There's no rage there, no hunger, just assessment. Then the Meg turns away. A juvenile lunges suddenly, slamming its head into the rock near the pod. Stone cracks. Sediment explodes outward. The juvenile backs off. The adult doesn't move. Another juvenile strikes. Harder. The rock fractures further. Jonas understands with sick clarity. This is a demonstration. Impact points. Structural failure. Cause and effect. They're learning how to break things, DJ whispers. Jonas corrects him quietly. They're refining it. The vibrations intensify. Cracks spiderweb across the rock shelf. The pod shifts, sliding inches closer to the drop. Jonas's mind races. This isn't random destruction. The Meg is testing whether the pod will fall, whether gravity will finish the job, whether humans panic when the ground disappears. Jonas makes a decision. He powers the pod. The hum is soft, but in the deep, it's a scream. The juveniles react instantly, bodies twitching, excitement rippling through them. The adult turns back, eye narrowing. Jonas pushes the thrusters just enough to counter the slide, stabilizing the pod against the rock. The Meg watches, learns. Jonas speaks, not to the crew, but to himself. If you want noise, I'll give you noise. He reroutes power, overloading a decoy beacon, and ejects it downward into the trench. The beacon ignites, flaring bright, sonar pulses screaming into the deep. The effect is immediate. The juveniles break formation, surging after the false prey. The adult hesitates. Just for a moment. Jonas uses it. He fires the thrusters hard, pulling the pod away from the collapsing shelf and into the thermal plume. Heat distorts everything. Sensors glitch. The water becomes chaos. The pod bucks violently, alarms shrieking as pressure spikes unpredictably. Jonas rides it, muscles locked, teeth clenched. Behind them, shadows collide as the Megs regroup, confused but not fooled for long. They burst out of the plume into open water, rising fast now, burning fuel they don't have. Jonas knows this can't last. He's buying seconds, maybe minutes. But seconds are everything. Above them, faint light filters down from the surface. Hope flickers. Then the water darkens again as the adult Meg surges upward. Faster now, no more lessons to give. Jonas locks eyes with the crew. When I say go, he tells them, you don't hesitate. No one asks what he means. They already know. Because someone has to be the last lesson. The Meg closes the distance with terrifying ease. The water ahead lightens, thinning into blue, but the shadow behind them grows darker, denser, swallowing everything else. Jonas feels the pod vibrate as pressure builds, metal complaining under forces it was never designed to survive. Alarms wail, Fuel hits critical. The ocean has run the numbers. It knows who wins. Now, Jonas says, calm and final. DJ hesitates for half a heartbeat. Too long. Jonas grabs him, shoves him toward the emergency hatch. Go. The others follow, panic snapping into motion. The pod rocks violently as the Meg surges closer, its presence bending the water, collapsing distance. Jonas slams the override, sealing the hatch behind them just as a massive shape fills the viewport. Silence. For a moment, it's just Jonas and the ocean. He reroutes the last of the power into the engines, overclocking everything. Warnings cascade. Systems fail one by one. He doesn't care. He turns the pod, aiming straight at the oncoming shadow. If the Meg wants a lesson, he'll make sure it remembers this one. The Meg accelerates. Impact comes like the world breaking. The pod slams into the Meg's armored snout, crumpling instantly, metal folding inward as if made of paper. Jonas is thrown forward, pain blooming white-hot, but he keeps his hands on the controls long enough to trigger the final sequence. The pod detonates. Not an explosion. An implosion. A concentrated collapse of pressure and energy that sends a shockwave ripping through the water. The Meg recoils, stunned, its massive body twisting as the force tears through its sensory systems. Blood clouds the water, dark and spreading. Above, the escape pod rockets toward the surface, tossed by the shockwave like a leaf. Inside, the crew screams as gravity shifts violently, then releases them. The ocean spits them upward, breaking into air in a spray of white and blue. They breathe. Below them, the water churns, shapes scatter. The juveniles retreat, disoriented, fleeing the unfamiliar violence. The adult Meg sinks slowly, wounded but alive, its massive form descending back into the dark, carrying something new with it. Caution. Hours later, rescue ships pull the survivors from the water. Blankets. Questions. Shaking hands that can't stop. Jiuming stares at the horizon, eyes hollow, replaying the moment over and over. DJ keeps looking down, as if expecting the sea to answer back. No body is found. Days pass. Official statements are issued. Equipment failure. Unexpected wildlife interaction. Mana. One is written off as a tragic loss. The data recovered is classified, buried under layers of corporate silence and government denial. It's easier that way. Safer. But the ocean doesn't forget. Far below, in the crushing dark of the trench, the Meg drifts among its kind. The wound along its snout heals slowly, a pale scar forming where metal and defiance once struck. The juveniles circle it now, restless, attentive. The adult moves differently than before. More careful, more aware. It learned something. Not how to break structures, how far humans will go when cornered, and that some prey doesn't flee. It fights. The ocean closes over the wound like nothing ever happened. On the surface, life moves on with practiced indifference. News cycles churn, replacing tragedy with something louder, brighter, easier to digest. Mana. One becomes a footnote. A line item. A risk assessed and written off. A risk assessed and written off. Jonas Taylor's name is spoken softly, then less and less, until it settles into the quiet space reserved for people who didn't come back. But quiet doesn't mean empty. Weeks later, Juming stands alone on the deck of a research vessel far from shipping lanes, staring down at water that looks calm enough to lie. He still hears it at night, the groan of metal, the low-frequency hum that crawled through his bones. DJ drinks too much now. Mac doesn't dive anymore. Survival leaves marks no one sees. Officially, all deep trench exploration is suspended. Temporarily. Unofficially, funding shifts sideways, rebranded, renamed. The hunger for what lies beneath doesn't disappear. It never does. Humans are bad at learning lessons that don't end them outright. Jiuming opens the sealed data one last time. Fragments recovered before Mana 1 fell. Movement patterns. Behavioral deviations. Proof. His hands tremble as he closes the file again. Some knowledge isn't meant to circulate. Some truths are too heavy for the surface. Far below, the trench breathes. The Meg moves through the dark with measured grace, its scar pale against ancient skin. The juveniles trail behind it now, mimicking distance, formation, patience. They avoid certain shapes, certain sounds. They give wide berth to sudden pressure changes. They remember. The ocean has adjusted. Time passes differently down there. Scars heal. Memory sharpens. The Meg drifts past the wreckage of Mana 1, twisted metal half buried in silt. It circles once, slow and deliberate, then moves on. The structure no longer interests it. Broken things rarely do. Above, a lone buoy bobs in open water, its instruments quietly logging data no one watches closely enough. A blip appears on the screen. Large. Then gone. The system flags it as a glitch and keeps recording waves. Jonas never surfaces. No body. No grave. Just a name etched into reports and into the people who lived because he didn't hesitate. Sometimes, in the space between sleep and waking, Jing imagines a final moment that no one saw. Not fear, not regret, just resolve. The kind that doesn't need witnesses. The ocean remains vast. Patient. Unchanged by human timelines. Somewhere in the dark, something massive turns, guided by instincts older than language and lessons learned the hard way. It doesn't rush toward the surface. It doesn't need to. The surface will come to it eventually. It always does. The first Meg worked because it understood the assignment. Big shark. Bigger scale. A knowing wink that said, yes, this is ridiculous, and that's the fun. Meg 2. The trench arrives under different pressure. Sequels don't get graded on charm alone. They get measured against escalation, expectation, and whether the creative team actually has a reason to go bigger beyond adding more teeth. This time, the responsibility fell to Ben Wheatley, a director best known not for glossy studio spectacle, but for abrasive, off-kilter films that thrive on discomfort and controlled chaos. On paper, that pairing sounds unhinged. In execution, it explains almost everything that makes The Trench feel the way it does. Wheatley's career has been defined by tonal instability. From Kill List to High Rise, he gravitates towards stories that fracture, mutate, and refuse comfort. Violence is rarely clean. Power structures rot from the inside. Even his forays into genre play like stress tests rather than celebrations. That sensibility is miles away from the clean, theme park blockbuster energy of the first Meg. And yet, that contrast is precisely why he was brought in. The studio didn't want a carbon copy. They wanted scale, yes, but also unpredictability. Something rougher, stranger, less polite. Instead of treating Meg 2 as a simple shark sequel, Wheatley approached it like a monster movie filtered through survival horror logic. The ocean isn't just a playground for action beats here. It's hostile, crushing, actively indifferent to human presence. The trench sequences lean into that philosophy hard, emphasizing pressure, darkness, and spatial disorientation over clean visual geography. You're not meant to feel thrilled first. You're meant to feel trapped. That's pure Wheatley, using environment as an antagonist rather than a backdrop. What's fascinating is how that instinct clashes with franchise expectations. This is still a 100+ million studio tentpole with Jason Statham front and center, mandated humor beats, and an international audience in mind. Wheatley doesn't reject that machinery, he bends it. Action scenes stretch longer than comfort allows. Violence lingers an extra second. When creatures attack, the camera doesn't always cut away to relief. It stays, forcing you to sit in the mess. It's blockbuster filmmaking with an itch under its skin. The creative genesis of The Trench also reflects a shift in ambition. The sequel isn't just about a bigger shark, it's about a bigger ecosystem of threats. Multiple Megs. Human antagonists. Prehistoric creatures that turn the third act into something closer to pulp science fantasy than aquatic thriller. That expansion didn't come from a desire to top kill counts alone. It came from Wheatley's interest in systems collapsing. What happens when humanity drills too deep, exploits too much, and unleashes consequences it can't control? That theme runs quietly beneath the surface, even when the movie is busy smashing helicopters. Wheatley's collaboration style plays a role here. He's not an auteur who locks himself in a tower. He thrives on collaboration, especially with designers and effects teams, pushing them to find textures that feel less synthetic. Even in a CGI-heavy film, there's an effort to ground-scale with weight. Murky water, obscured shapes, motion that feels cumbersome rather than slick. The creatures aren't graceful. They're oppressive. They move like natural disasters, not ballet dancers. That choice shapes the film's entire physical identity. The production companies backing the film, Apelli's Entertainment, Di Bonaventura Pictures, and Warner Brothers, clearly gave Wheatley room to experiment within boundaries. This isn't studio anarchy, but it's also not anonymous. You can feel a director poking at the edges of what a summer sequel is allowed to be. Sometimes that tension produces thrilling strangeness. Sometimes it produces tonal whiplash. Both outcomes feel intentional rather than accidental. What ultimately defines Wheatley's vision for Meg 2 is escalation through excess. Not just bigger action, but more of everything. Creatures, betrayals, locations, genres colliding in the same runtime. It's messy, loud, occasionally ungainly, but it never feels asleep at the wheel. This is a director actively wrestling a franchise into a shape that reflects his instincts, even when those instincts don't always align with mass appeal smoothness. That friction is the movie's identity. The trench doesn't glide the way the first film did. It lurches forward, sometimes violently, sometimes awkwardly, always with the sense that the person steering it wanted to see how far a studio monster movie could be pushed before it snapped. Whether that gamble pays off depends on taste. But the intent is unmistakable, because once the vision was locked in, the next challenge wasn't spectacle. It was structure. And the script had to find a way to justify all this ambition without collapsing under its own weight. That's where the real battle began. The screenplay for Meg 2, The Trench, had an impossible job. It needed to feel bigger than the first film without becoming parody, more dangerous without losing its PG-13 crowd-pleasing instincts, and more complex without slowing the momentum that made the original such an easy watch. That tension defines every creative decision baked into the script. Instead of refining a single threat, the writers chose expansion as their guiding principle. More monsters, more villains, more locations, more genres colliding inside one narrative spine. The story still draws loose inspiration from Steve Alten's novels, but by this point the films are operating in their own ecosystem. Fidelity to the books matters less than momentum. The writers, John Hober, Eric Hober, and Dean Georgaris, approach the sequel less like an adaptation and more like an escalation exercise. The core question driving development wasn't what happens next, but how far can this premise stretch before it snaps? The answer, as the script demonstrates, is pretty far. Structurally, the screenplay abandons the relative simplicity of the first film. Instead of a clean three-act shark hunt progression, The Trench stacks narratives on top of each other. There's the deep-sea expedition plot, the corporate sabotage subplot, the surface-level resort survival scenario, and then, looming over all of it, the prehistoric chaos unleashed by human arrogance. The script doesn't ease into these threads. It collides them. That choice creates a restless energy, constantly pushing the story forward, even when logic starts to bend. Dialogue plays a very specific role here. It's functional, often blunt, occasionally cheeky. This isn't a script interested in lyrical speech or philosophical monologues. Characters speak to move pieces across the board. Exposition comes fast, sometimes aggressively so, because the movie knows it doesn't want audiences lingering too long on explanation when there are monsters waiting. Humor pops up in short bursts, usually dry, sometimes intentionally ridiculous, acting as pressure valves rather than tonal anchors. One of the more daring narrative decisions is how early the film commits to scale. The Trench isn't a third-act reveal. It's the launching pad. By pushing the deepest, most dangerous environment to the forefront, the screenplay signals that this sequel won't save its biggest ideas for last. That creates a strange effect. The movie peaks early in terms of conceptual awe, then has to keep inventing new ways to feel threatening. Hence, the human villains, the multiple Megs, the land-based chaos. It's escalation through accumulation. The human antagonists are particularly telling from a writing perspective. Rather than positioning nature as the sole enemy, the script leans hard into corporate greed and betrayal. These characters aren't subtle, but they aren't meant to be. They function as accelerants, forcing action, creating internal danger when external threats momentarily recede. In a quieter movie, they might feel cartoonish. Here, they fit the heightened reality the script is chasing. Pacing becomes the screenplay's greatest gamble. The film rarely pauses to breathe, which keeps energy high but risks emotional flatness. Character arcs exist, but they're secondary to survival mechanics. Jonas Taylor doesn't undergo a radical transformation. He's sharpened, hardened, more reactive than reflective. That's a conscious writing choice. The script treats him less like a traditional protagonist and more like a force of momentum, someone who moves the plot rather than being moved by it. What the screenplay does surprisingly well is genre fusion. At different moments, Meg 2 feels like a deep-sea horror film, a corporate thriller, a creature feature throwback, and eventually a survival action spectacle bordering on pulp fantasy. These shifts could have fractured the movie completely. Instead, the script leans into the absurdity of that tonal blend. It doesn't apologize. It barrels forward with the confidence that, if you keep things loud, fast, and dangerous enough, coherence becomes optional. That philosophy explains some of the script's rough edges. Logic gaps exist. Character decisions sometimes prioritize spectacle over sense. Scientific plausibility stretches until it screams. But none of that is accidental. The writers are operating under a clear mandate: entertainment through excess. Every sequence aims to outdo the last, even if it means abandoning realism entirely. In that way, the screenplay understands exactly what kind of movie it's writing. What ultimately holds the script together is clarity of intent. This isn't a movie pretending to be smarter than it is. It's a movie daring you to keep up. The writing treats escalation itself as narrative satisfaction, each new threat a promise that the ride isn't slowing down anytime soon. Whether that approach thrills or exhausts depends on the viewer, but the confidence is undeniable. And yet, a screenplay like this only works if the right people are chosen to inhabit it. Characters on the page are one thing, characters on screen are another entirely. The next step, casting, would determine whether this ambitious, overloaded script could survive contact with reality. Casting Meg 2, The Trench, wasn't about finding surprises. It was about reinforcing a specific kind of cinematic contract. This franchise lives or dies on whether audiences believe one man can stand between humanity and extinction with nothing but grit, muscle memory, and a death wish disguised as confidence. Jason Statham isn't just the star of this sequel, he's the structural backbone. The entire casting philosophy orbits that fact. Statham's return as Jonas Taylor was never in doubt. After the first film's global success, his persona had fused completely with the franchise's identity. He brings something rare to modern blockbusters: credibility without vulnerability theatrics. He doesn't over-explain fear, he absorbs it. That quality becomes even more important in a sequel that escalates danger instead of emotion. Jonas in The Trench isn't rediscovering courage or overcoming doubt. He's already been there. The casting choice signals that immediately. This isn't an arc about becoming a hero. It's about enduring longer than the environment wants you to. What's interesting is how the casting leans into Statham's aging action star presence rather than fighting it. He's not framed as invincible. He's framed as relentless. That distinction matters. Every grunt, every scar, every blunt line delivery reinforces the idea that survival comes from experience, not optimism. Casting anyone younger or flashier would have broken that illusion. Statham grounds the madness through sheer familiarity. Around him, the ensemble had a different task. Contrast. Wu Jing's inclusion is one of the sequel's most strategic decisions. As Jiuming Zhang, he isn't there to replace Jonas. He's there to reflect him from another angle. Wu brings precision where Statham brings blunt force. His screen presence carries discipline, restraint, and quiet authority. The chemistry isn't loud banter, it's mutual recognition. Two men who understand the cost of deep water without needing to say it out loud. From a casting perspective, that balance broadens the film's global appeal, while also enriching its masculine dynamic without resorting to rivalry cliches. Sophia Kai's return as Maying anchors the emotional continuity between films. Casting a younger actor in a sequel often risks feeling like a studio obligation. Here, it works because the character functions as connective tissue between science, ethics, and consequence. Kai plays intelligence without precocious smugness. She reacts like someone who understands the stakes intellectually but is still processing them emotionally. That balance is difficult, especially in a film this loud. Her casting choice keeps the human cost from evaporating completely amid the spectacle. The supporting cast reflects the screenplay's escalation strategy. Cliff Curtis brings authority and weariness as Mac, grounding the expedition side of the story with a sense of professional fatigue. He feels like someone who's been managing impossible situations for too long. That's not accidental. Curtis excels at playing institutional calm under pressure, and the film leans on that quality heavily. When things go wrong, and they always do, you trust that he's already thought 10 steps ahead, even if it won't be enough. Then there are the antagonists, cast with deliberate lack of subtlety. Sergio Paris. Menchetta and Skylar Samuels embody corporate malice with clean edges and sharp smiles. They aren't meant to feel nuanced. They're meant to feel inevitable. The casting emphasizes that these aren't monsters in the dark. They're predators in daylight. Their performances lean into arrogance, entitlement, and disposable morality. It works because the film isn't interested in redeeming them. It wants them to be fuel for chaos. What's notable across the ensemble is the absence of stunt casting. No distracting cameos. No ironic celebrity winks. Every actor feels chosen to serve function over novelty. That restraint is rare in sequels of this scale, and it speaks to a casting philosophy focused on efficiency. Each role exists to push the story forward, heighten tension, or sharpen contrast against Jonas's stoic center. Chemistry tests mattered here, particularly for scenes confined to tight spaces. Submersibles, control rooms, underwater suits. These environments magnify performance flaws instantly. Actors had to sell trust quickly, often without dialogue. The casting reflects that requirement. Faces that read well under pressure. Physicality that feels believable in motion. Reaction shots that carry narrative weight when words disappear. There's also a quiet consistency in how the cast handles tone. Nobody plays this like satire, even when the premise edges toward absurdity. That's a casting success. The actors commit fully, treating every threat as real, every loss as permanent. That commitment is what allows the audience to accept prehistoric creatures rampaging through modern infrastructure without laughing the movie off the screen. Ultimately, the casting of Meg 2, The Trench, isn't about range, it's about alignment. Every performer understands the movie they're in and plays accordingly. Statham anchors, Wu balances, the ensemble supports, the villains provoke. It's a machine built for forward momentum, not introspection. And once those pieces are in place, the real test begins. Because casting is about potential, but performance is where that potential either detonates or disappears. And in a film this physically demanding, the actors didn't just show up. They endured. Jason Statham doesn't play Jonas Taylor in Meg 2, The Trench. He operates him. Every movement feels pre-calculated, like a man who's already survived the worst possible version of this nightmare and now treats danger as a logistical problem. That choice defines the performance. There's no rediscovery of fear here, no wide-eyed disbelief. Jonas has crossed that bridge. Statham leans into a performance built on compression. Emotions pushed inward. Reactions shaved down to their most efficient form. It's a survival mindset rendered through physicality. Watch how Statham handles silence. When the trench collapses around him, he doesn't sell panic with volume. His breathing changes. His eyes narrow. His body tightens, conserving energy. This is an actor who understands that fear doesn't always explode, it calcifies. That restraint gives the film something crucial: credibility. Without it, the escalating absurdity would float away from reality entirely. Instead, Statham anchors the madness with muscle memory and exhaustion. What elevates the performance is how aware it is of legacy. Statham isn't chasing reinvention. He's refining. Jonas feels like a culmination of decades of action archetypes. Less flashy than Transporter, less explosive than Crank, but heavier. There's weight here. Every punch, every decision carries the implication that the body delivering it has paid for this skill over time. That's not written into the script. That's performance history bleeding into character. Wu Jing's Jiuming Zhang operates on a different frequency. Where Statham is blunt force, Wu is controlled velocity. His performance is defined by economy-measured speech, deliberate gestures, eyes constantly scanning. He plays intelligence without arrogance, bravery without theatrics. In scenes where science and survival collide, Wu's calm presence stabilizes the frame. He doesn't compete with Jonas. He complements him. Their shared screen time works because neither actor tries to dominate. Mutual respect reads in every exchanged glance. The trench sequences reveal Wu's greatest strength: internalized tension. He reacts before events fully register, suggesting a mind perpetually running calculations. When plans unravel, his frustration isn't loud, it's sharp. You feel the disappointment of someone who understands exactly what went wrong and how avoidable it was. That specificity adds texture to scenes that could have devolved into generic chaos. Sophia Kai brings an entirely different energy. As Mei Ying, she carries the emotional continuity of the franchise, and her performance benefits from subtle growth. She's no longer just reacting, she's participating. Kai plays intelligence as curiosity rather than certainty. Her expressions often land between confidence and doubt, capturing the uncomfortable space of knowing too much for her age while still feeling the weight of consequence. It's a performance that resists precocious cliches, grounding the film's ethical undertones without halting momentum. Cliff Curtis deserves special attention. As Mac, he functions as the film's pressure gauge. Curtis excels at projecting leadership fatigue, the look of someone who's made too many impossible calls and knows this one won't end cleanly either. His voice never rises unnecessarily. His authority comes from steadiness. In ensemble scenes, he anchors chaos not by commanding attention, but by absorbing it. That restraint gives the film a spine during its most crowded sequences. The antagonists, by contrast, are played with intentional sharpness. Sergio Paris, Menchetta, leans into predatory confidence, delivering his lines with the ease of someone who believes consequences are for other people. It's not subtle, but it's precise. Skylar Samuels mirrors that energy with cold calculation, her performance defined by micro-expressions of disdain and entitlement. Together, they form a villainous presence that feels less monstrous than the creatures, and that's the point. Their menace comes from choice, not instinct. What ties these performances together is physical commitment. This is a movie that demands bodies in motion. Running, fighting, bracing against imaginary forces rendered later in post-production. Every actor sells weight and resistance convincingly. No one feels detached from the environment. That's harder than it looks, especially when much of the danger isn't actually there on set. The cast's ability to react as if it is keeps the illusion intact. There's also a tonal discipline at play. Nobody winks at the camera. Nobody breaks immersion with irony. Even when the film veers toward pulp spectacle, the performances stay grounded. That consistency is why the movie doesn't collapse under its own excess. The actors treat every moment as real, and the audience follows their lead. Ultimately, Meg 2, The Trench succeeds in its performances not because they're flashy, but because they're functional. Each actor understands their role in the machine. Statham drives, Wu stabilizes, Kai humanizes, Curtis grounds. The villains provoke. It's an ecosystem of performances designed to survive pressure, much like the world the film throws them into. But performances alone can't carry a film of this scale. They need a physical world to inhabit, one that feels tangible, oppressive, and dangerous. And that world was meticulously constructed long before cameras rolled. By the time Meg 2, The Trench expands into full ensemble mode, the movie has already made one thing clear. Survival here isn't a solo sport. The supporting cast doesn't exist to decorate Jonas Taylor's heroics. They exist to complicate them. Every secondary performance adds friction, emotional, ethical, or logistical, forcing the film to feel crowded in the best possible way. This is a story about systems under pressure, and the ensemble embodies that strain. Cliff Curtis's Mac remains the emotional ballast of the film. While Jonas reacts instinctively, Mac thinks structurally. Curtis plays him like a man constantly running triage in his head, who gets saved, what gets sacrificed, and how much blood is acceptable to keep the mission alive. His performance thrives in reaction shots. Watch his face when plans unravel. There's no shock, just recalibration. That quality makes Mac feel indispensable. He isn't the loudest presence in the room, but when he speaks, the film listens. Paige Kennedy brings a very different energy as DJ. Humor is dangerous in a film like this. It can puncture tension instantly if mishandled. Kennedy understands the assignment. His comedy doesn't undercut danger, it spikes it. Jokes land because they feel like nervous reflexes, not scripted punchlines. He reacts the way real people do when terror overstays its welcome, through deflection. That makes his lighter moments feel earned rather than distracting, and it gives the audience oxygen without breaking immersion. Melisante Mahut's Regas adds a subtle but crucial layer. She plays competence without bravado, intelligence without exposition dumps. In crowded scenes, her presence registers through decisiveness. She moves with purpose, speaks when needed, acts when others hesitate. It's a performance built on clarity, and clarity matters when the film's scale threatens to overwhelm orientation. Regas helps the audience track the human chessboard amid the chaos. Skylar Samuel's performance as one of the corporate antagonists works precisely because it resists cartoon villain excess. She doesn't sneer constantly. She calculates. Her cruelty is casual, almost administrative. That restraint makes her choices feel colder than overt malice. She's not driven by rage or revenge. She's driven by profit and control. That banality is unsettling, especially when set against prehistoric monstrosities acting on pure instinct. One kills because it must, the other because it can. Sergio Paris Manchetta leans harder into physical menace. His presence is invasive. He occupies space like someone accustomed to dominance. The performance thrives on confidence bordering on contempt. Contempt for rules, for safety, for anyone weaker in the hierarchy. He doesn't need lengthy monologues to establish threat. His body language does the work. When he enters a scene, equilibrium shifts. That's effective villain casting, threat without explanation. What's impressive about the ensemble is how little redundancy exists. No two supporting characters serve the same function. Each one represents a different response to crisis: discipline, humor, calculation, ambition, fatigue. That diversity keeps scenes alive even when the plot accelerates aggressively. Conversations feel like collisions of worldview rather than information exchanges. Ensemble chemistry becomes especially important in confined spaces. Submersibles, underwater suits, control rooms. These settings magnify tension instantly. Actors can't rely on movement or spectacle. They have faces, voices, timing. The supporting cast handles these moments with restraint. Nobody overplays panic. Nobody hogs focus. Fear ripples through the group organically, passing from one performer to another like a current. There's also a refreshing absence of disposable caricatures. Even characters with limited screen time feel sketched with intention. That matters because the film isn't shy about casualties. When danger strikes, it doesn't always discriminate narratively. The supporting performances make those moments land harder. Loss feels abrupt rather than theatrical. Another strength lies in how the ensemble responds to Jonas rather than orbiting him blindly. They challenge him, question him, occasionally ignore him. That friction prevents the film from becoming a one-man fantasy. Jonas may be the tip of the spear, but the shaft is collective effort and collective failure. The supporting cast ensures that dynamic stays intact. Perhaps the most important contribution the ensemble makes is tonal discipline. Nobody plays this movie like a joke, even when the premise pushes into outrageous territory. The actors commit fully to stakes, and that commitment is contagious. The audience accepts the escalation because the people on screen never stop believing in the danger. In the end, Meg 2, the trench functions like a pressure chamber. Jonas is the constant. The supporting cast is the variable force testing his limits from every angle. Without them, the film would collapse into repetition. With them, it becomes something messier, louder, and far more alive. And once those performances are placed into a physical environment, steel corridors, abyssal darkness, and man-made structures cracking under impossible stress, the next layer of the film reveals itself. Because this world wasn't just imagined, it was built. The physical world of Meg 2, the trench, is designed to feel hostile before a single creature appears. Long before teeth enter the frame, the environment is already pressing in, daring the characters to survive it. That's not accidental. The production design treats space itself as an antagonist, cold, mechanical, and utterly indifferent to human presence. Every corridor, console, and underwater structure exists to remind you how small people are once they leave the surface. The deep-sea facilities are the film's visual backbone, and they're built with a brutal kind of functionality. No glossy sci-fi polish. No futuristic elegance. Steel looks heavy. Panels are scuffed. Corners feel sharp enough to bruise. This is working infrastructure, not a showroom. The design communicates that these spaces were engineered for efficiency, not comfort, which makes their eventual failure feel inevitable. When systems break, it doesn't feel like sabotage. It feels like entropy winning. Color plays a quiet but essential role. Blues and greens dominate the trench environments, but they're desaturated, almost sickly. Light doesn't flood these spaces. It leaks in reluctantly. Shadows cling to corners. Even illuminated areas feel temporary, like safety borrowed on credit. The palette drains warmth from human interaction, reinforcing the idea that the ocean doesn't care who you are or what you intend. You're trespassing, and the design never lets you forget it. Contrast that with the surface-level locations, which lean into artificial brightness and human arrogance. Beaches, facilities, and recreational spaces are framed as controlled environments, places where people believe they've tamed nature. The production design makes that confidence feel fragile. Clean lines, open spaces. A sense of order waiting to be disrupted. When chaos eventually arrives, those environments collapse quickly, visually proving how thin the illusion of control really was. The submersibles deserve special attention. These aren't sleek fantasy pods. They're cramped, claustrophobic pressure cans. Seats feel too close. Windows feel too small. Controls crowd the frame. Actors are boxed in physically, which heightens performance tension without a word being spoken. The design forces proximity between characters, between fear, between consequences. It's an old-school suspense tactic executed with modern scale. Costume design works hand in hand with the environments. Underwater suits aren't heroic silhouettes. They're bulky, restrictive, and visibly exhausting to wear. Movement looks laborious. Every step feels earned. That choice grounds the action in physical struggle rather than power fantasy. On land, tactical gear and corporate attire visually separate motivations. Survival clothing is functional and worn. Corporate clothing is crisp and detached. You can read intent before dialogue ever confirms it. One of the smartest design choices lies in how creatures are framed against human structures. The Megs aren't always shown in full. Often, you see them in relation to scale. Shadow passing a window, a structure buckling, debris drifting through water. The production design gives the creatures reference points, allowing size to register emotionally rather than mathematically. A shark is scary. A shark that dwarfs the machinery you trusted to keep you alive is something else entirely. What's impressive is how seamlessly practical sets and digital extensions merge. Physical environments give actors real surfaces to fight against, cling to, or be crushed by. Digital elements expand those spaces without overpowering them. The result is cohesion. Even when the spectacle ramps up, the world never feels abstract. You understand where characters are, what's failing, and why escape feels impossible. There's also a storytelling discipline in background detail. Screens flicker with data that feels plausible. Warning lights don't flash arbitrarily, they escalate. Cracks appear before collapse. Flooding doesn't arrive all at once, it creeps. These details may not register consciously, but they build trust. The audience believes the world because it behaves consistently under pressure. Ultimately, the production design of Meg 2, The Trench, succeeds because it refuses to romanticize danger. This is not a beautiful abyss. It's an unforgiving one. The environments don't exist to awe. They exist to test. And every design choice, from color palette to spatial layout, reinforces that philosophy. Once that world is built, the next challenge becomes capturing it, deciding where to place the camera, how to move it, and how to make scale readable without losing clarity. That responsibility fell to the film's visual language, where technical execution would determine whether this immense world felt navigable or overwhelming. The visual language of Meg 2. The Trench is built around a single, unforgiving principle. Scale must be felt, not explained. The cinematography doesn't chase beauty for its own sake. It chases orientation, constantly reminding you where characters are in relation to danger, pressure, and collapse. That's a harder task than it sounds. In a film this crowded with movement, creatures, and environments that want to swallow the frame whole. Underwater cinematography is where the film's technical ambition really shows its teeth. Darkness isn't treated as absence, it's treated as weight. Light behaves cautiously, slicing through murk instead of illuminating it. Beams don't reveal safety, they reveal how much remains unseen. The camera often stays just far enough back to deny certainty. You're never fully sure what's outside the frame, and that uncertainty does more work than jump scares ever could. Camera movement underwater is deliberate and restrained. No frantic whip pans, no dizzying spins. Instead, the camera drifts, glides, and occasionally stalls, mirroring the resistance characters feel as they move through pressurized space. That choice grounds the action physically. Even when things accelerate, the camera resists chaos, preserving spatial logic. You know where the exit is. You know how far away danger might be. And you know, instinctively, that distance is not on anyone's side. Lens choice plays a subtle but crucial role. Wider lenses dominate trench sequences, exaggerating negative space and making characters feel swallowed by their surroundings. Faces distort slightly at the edges, reinforcing discomfort. On the surface, the film tightens its perspective. Medium and longer lenses compress space, making environments feel crowded even when they're technically open. That visual shift reinforces the film's thematic contrast between perceived safety and actual vulnerability. Lighting strategy deserves particular attention. Artificial light sources, helmet lamps, control panels, emergency strobes drive most scenes. The cinematography rarely cheats with invisible fill light. When illumination fails, it fails honestly. Shadows deepen. Information disappears. Characters move blindly, and the camera follows suit. This commitment to motivated lighting enhances tension while preserving realism. It also gives moments of clarity extra punch. When something finally emerges into light, it feels earned and often terrifying. On land, the cinematography shifts gears without losing identity. The camera becomes more kinetic, embracing handheld instability during action beats. Framing tightens. Cuts come faster. But even here, clarity remains a priority. You always understand the geography of a fight or chase, which is no small feat when multiple threats occupy the same space. The film never sacrifices comprehension for speed, a restraint that keeps spectacle from dissolving into noise. One of the film's smartest visual decisions lies in how it reveals the creatures. Full-body shots are rare and strategic. More often, the camera frames partial information, a tail cutting through water, a shadow eclipsing light, debris moving against current. These fragments let the audience assemble scale mentally, which makes the threat feel larger than any single image could. When full reveals finally happen, they land with authority rather than novelty. The integration of visual effects benefits enormously from this approach. CGI elements are rarely asked to carry the entire frame. They're anchored by practical reference points, sets, water tanks, physical props, that give weight and texture to digital creations. The cinematography respects those boundaries, never pushing too close or too clean. Imperfection becomes an ally. Murk hides seams. Motion blur sells force. Reality and simulation blur just enough to feel convincing. Framing also reinforces character dynamics. Jonas Taylor is often shot slightly lower than eye level, giving him a grounded, immovable presence. Others are framed more vulnerably, either boxed in by the environment or dwarfed by negative space. These choices aren't flashy, but they're consistent. Visual hierarchy remains legible even during chaos. What the cinematography never does is romanticize destruction. Collapsing structures aren't filmed like fireworks. They're filmed like failures. Slow, ugly, unstoppable. The camera doesn't celebrate impact. It witnesses consequence. That perspective aligns perfectly with the film's underlying tension: humanity pushing into spaces it doesn't understand and paying the price for that arrogance. By the time the dust or silt settles, the visual language has done its job. You've navigated impossible spaces without getting lost. You've felt scale without being overwhelmed. You've survived scenes that could have easily collapsed into visual mush. That's technical discipline at work. And yet, vision is only half the sensory equation. What you see sets the stage, but what you hear completes the illusion. Because in a world this hostile, sound isn't decoration. It's warning. It's pressure. It's survival instinct made audible. Sound is doing more work in Meg 2, The Trench, than most viewers consciously realize. This is a film where vision is often limited by darkness, murk, pressure, distance, and audio steps in to complete the picture. The sonic landscape isn't ornamental. It's structural. Without it, the tension collapses. Harry Gregson Williams returns to the franchise with a score that understands restraint as power. Instead of wall-to-wall bombast, the music operates in pulses. Low-frequency drones creep beneath scenes like a warning you can feel more than hear. The score rarely announces danger outright. It foreshadows it. Notes stretch uncomfortably long, refusing resolution, creating a sense of suspended threat that mirrors the trench itself. You're waiting for impact that may or may not arrive. One of the score's smartest choices is knowing when to disappear. Silence isn't empty here, it's loaded. In underwater sequences, music often pulls back entirely, replaced by muffled breathing, suit mechanics, and distant metallic groans. That absence sharpens attention. Every sound becomes information. Every creak suggests collapse. The audience leans forward not because the music demands it, but because the quiet does. When the score does surge, it does so with purpose. Action cues don't overwhelm. They underline momentum. Percussion hits feel heavy, grounded, almost industrial. This isn't heroic fanfare. It's propulsion. The music pushes scenes forward without telling you how to feel about them. Triumph is fleeting here. Survival is the only sustained theme. Sound design carries the heaviest lift. The trench is alive acoustically. Water pressure is rendered as a constant presence. Low, omnipresent, oppressive. It hums beneath dialogue, reminding you that the environment itself is the enemy. Mechanical sounds dominate human spaces: pumps, valves, alarms, systems straining under stress. These noises escalate gradually, building dread long before anything visually breaks. Creature sound design avoids cliché. The Megs don't roar constantly. Their presence is often announced indirectly, through displaced water, distant vibrations, structural resonance. You hear the effect before the cause. That choice makes them feel larger, less contained. They're not just animals moving through space. They're forces disturbing it. On land, the audio palette shifts but remains disciplined. Explosions have weight, not just volume. Impacts sound painful, not clean. Screams don't echo theatrically. They cut off abruptly, swallowed by chaos. The mix favors immediacy over spectacle. You feel close to the danger, never comfortably removed from it. Dialogue mixing is intentionally uneven, especially in crisis moments. Characters talk over each other. Words get lost. Instructions overlap. That chaos isn't sloppiness, it's realism. In environments where communication is compromised, clarity becomes a luxury. The film lets that confusion live in the soundscape rather than smoothing it out for convenience. Diegetic and non-diegetic sound blur frequently. Alarms bleed into score elements. Mechanical rhythms sync with musical beats. It's often hard to tell where environment ends and composition begins, and that's the point. The characters can't separate danger from background noise, so neither can the audience. Perhaps the most effective sonic choice is how sound scales with perspective. Inside a suit, audio compresses. Breathing dominates, external noise dulls. Outside, sound expands, becoming vast and directionless. These shifts keep the audience oriented emotionally, even when visuals obscure geography. You always feel where you are, even when you can't see it. The climax uses sound as exhaustion. Layers stack, music swells, alarms scream, water crashes. Then brief, merciful quiet. That contrast lands harder than any jump scare. It's relief earned through sensory overload. By the time the final notes fade, the soundscape has done more than heighten tension. It has taught you how to survive this world, what to listen for, what to fear, when to run. That's sophisticated audio storytelling hiding inside a creature feature sequel. But crafting that experience didn't come easily. Behind the scenes, Meg 2, The Trench, was a logistical puzzle full of technical challenges, location hurdles, and controlled chaos. And some of the most interesting stories happened far from the screen. By the time Meg 2, The Trench reached production, ambition had already outgrown comfort. This wasn't a sequel content to repeat a formula. It was a logistical stress test. Bigger environments, more creatures, more water, more moving parts. And water, in filmmaking, is never just water. It's delay, danger, and dollars evaporating by the minute. The production spanned multiple countries and stages, with large portions filmed on massive water tank sets designed to simulate the crushing depths of the trench. These weren't shallow splash pools dressed up with camera tricks. They were deep, controlled environments built to give actors physical resistance. Real buoyancy, real drag, real fatigue. That decision paid dividends on screen, but it demanded patience behind the camera. Takes were slower. Reset times were longer. Every movement had to be choreographed around safety first. Actors didn't just perform underwater, they trained for it. Extensive breath control, movement conditioning, and coordination rehearsals were required so scenes wouldn't devolve into flailing chaos. Jason Statham, already known for doing much of his own physical work, leaned fully into the demands. His comfort in water became an asset, allowing scenes to be staged with longer takes and fewer cheats. That confidence also set the tone for the rest of the cast. When the lead commits physically, everyone else follows. One of the production's greatest challenges was balancing practical effects with visual effects without letting either dominate. Physical sets were constructed to partial scale, with digital extensions planned from the start rather than patched in later. That meant constant communication between departments: production design, cinematography, VFX, and stunts, working in tandem instead of sequence. It's a slower process, but it prevents the disjointed feel that plagues many effects. Heavy films. Creature interaction presented its own hurdles. Actors often performed against rigs, markers, or empty water, relying on timing and imagination. To help ground performances, the crew used physical reference objects, moving poles, water displacement machines, and lighting cues to simulate the presence of massive creatures. These weren't placeholders. They were performance tools, giving actors something tangible to react to. The difference shows. Fear looks directed, not generalized. Weather added another layer of unpredictability, especially during surface-level sequences. Wind, changing light, and water conditions forced constant recalibration. Schedules shifted. Shots were reblocked on the fly. Flexibility became a survival skill. Director Ben Wheatley's approach proved invaluable here. Rather than forcing rigid control, he adapted, reshaping scenes around what the environment offered instead of fighting it. That willingness to pivot kept production moving when conditions refused to cooperate. Stunt coordination pushed boundaries without crossing recklessness. Many action beats were designed to look brutal while remaining controlled. Falls, impacts, and underwater struggles were carefully engineered to minimize risk while maximizing visceral effect. Safety divers were omnipresent. Medical teams stayed on standby. This was a set that understood its own danger and respected it. There were also moments of unexpected levity. Long days in tanks tend to breed gallows, humor, and the cast reportedly leaned into that camaraderie to stay sane. Between takes, jokes flew. Music played. Energy reset. That off-camera bonding translated into on-screen trust, especially in scenes where characters rely on each other instinctively. You can't fake that kind of cohesion. It's built through shared discomfort. Post-production became its own marathon. Visual effects teams faced the challenge of maintaining scale consistency across dozens of sequences. A Meg can't feel enormous in one scene and merely large in another. That required meticulous calibration: camera distance, movement speed, water interaction, all tuned to preserve believability. Sound design and score were layered late in the process, fine-tuning rhythm and impact after visuals locked. Reshoots, when they happened, weren't about fixing story problems. They were about clarity, tightening geography, sharpening action beats, reinforcing stakes. That's the mark of a production that knows what it wants and is willing to refine rather than reinvent. By the end, Meg 2, The Trench wasn't just a finished film, it was a feat of coordination. Hundreds of people moving in sync to create chaos that feels organic, dangerous, and overwhelming. It's easy to watch the final product and focus on the monsters, harder to appreciate the controlled madness required to bring them to life. Box office performance matters for Meg 2, The Trench, because it's where creative ambition collides with audience appetite. After the financial success of the first Meg, which proved that giant shark spectacle could translate into global enthusiasm, expectations for the sequel were high. Studios don't greenlight deeper, darker, more complex ideas without looking at dollars and cents. And with The Trench, Warner Brothers and partners were betting that a bigger, louder, freakier movie could deliver on both spectacle and return. From the opening weekend onward, the numbers painted a picture of solid commercial traction. International markets remained especially critical. In the modern blockbuster ecosystem, global grosses often matter as much as domestic ones, sometimes more. Meg films have historically performed best in China and Southeast Asia, where aquatic epics with clear spectacle cues play strongly. The Trench leaned into that by casting internationally recognizable talent like Jing and crafting set pieces that resonate across cultures: massive creatures, visual danger, and survival stakes that don't require language fluency to understand. In the US, Smark was Wall, and other Western markets, Meg 2 faced a different challenge. Audiences there have more blockbuster competition than ever, and while spectacle can still draw, narrative familiarity sometimes blunts urgency to see just another big sequel. That's where the film's tonal swings come into play. It's not just a bigger shark movie. It's a layered, borderline survival thriller that defies some audience expectations. That ambition can be a double-edged sword. Critics often appreciate it, even when results are mixed, while general audiences can respond unpredictably. Marketing played a significant role in shaping box office outcomes. Trailers emphasized the trench itself, not just the shark threat, but the oppressive environment, the darkness, the unknown. That positioned the film as more than just shark attacks. It set it up as a deeper and, crucially, more mysterious experience. Teasers highlighting underwater infrastructure, emergent creatures, and claustrophobic suspense piqued curiosity beyond the standard creature feature framing. Posters and promos played upscale chaos on the surface, unknowable tension beneath, inviting comparisons to both classic monster films and survival epics. Audience reception mirrored the film's creative duality. Early viewer feedback praised the expanded creature roster and visual ambition, sometimes calling it one of the more intense installments of the Meg franchise. These are exactly the kind of positives that translate into healthy weekend holds and strong international multiplier effects. How well a film performs after the first weekend. On the flip side, some viewers found the tonal shifts between blockbuster set pieces, action beats, and deeper atmospheric horror to be uneven. That mix didn't universally land, but it did create conversation, which is its own kind of cultural currency in an era where social chatter boosts ticket sales. Streaming and home release strategy also factor into the broader financial picture. Big tentpole films now have dual life cycles: theatrical release and digital streaming availability. Meg 2 was positioned to exploit both, targeting blockbuster dollars first, then sustained interest on digital platforms where spectacle-heavy titles often find longer tails. This rollout can help recoup costs from global distribution, marketing outlay, and effects. Heavy production, especially if theatrical windows shorten and audience viewing habits continue shifting. Critically, The Trench boxed itself into a niche between mass-market accessibility and genre-forward daring. That space is tough to navigate, too intense for casual popcorn crowds looking for easy laughs, too traditional for hardcore horror aficionados. Yet this ambiguity also carved out a distinctive identity. Box office numbers didn't just reflect ticket sales. They measured whether audiences wanted this kind of shark sequel in 2023, not just a shark sequel. When numbers rolled in, the pattern was clear. Strong international opening and sustained global interest bolstered the overall gross above many mid-budget expectations. Competitive domestic performance, while not exceptional, remained respectable thanks to curiosity and franchise recognition. Genre curiosity and novelty helped drive repeat engagement in markets where aquatic creature features have cultural traction. Studios evaluate more than raw totals. The trajectory matters. Did the film fall sharply after its opening weekend? Or did word of mouth keep it afloat? Meg 2 demonstrated reasonable holding power, which signals confidence for future installments. So what does this mean going forward? The performance of The Trench suggests the franchise still has commercial life. It's big enough to continue exploring deeper mythology, more creatures, and even more complex threats. Its ambition, while divisive, marked it as different in a sea of sequels that often feel interchangeable. And in the entertainment economy of 2025, different can be profitable, especially when paired with spectacle that demands to be seen on the biggest screen possible. In other words, The Trench didn't just survive the box office. It taught studios something about what audiences are willing to follow into the deep. By the time Meg 2, The Trench hit theaters, the conversation around it fractured almost immediately. And that fracture tells you more than any single score ever could. This wasn't a movie designed to be politely received. It dared critics and audiences to either ride with its escalation or reject it outright. And they did both, loudly. Critical response leaned cautious, often divided along expectation lines. Reviewers who approached the film hoping for tighter realism or narrative restraint found themselves at odds with its maximalist instincts. The expanded creature roster, genre blending, and tonal swings became easy targets. Some critics argued the film overreached, mistaking escalation for coherence. Others bristled at how unapologetically pulpy it became, especially in the third act, where prehistoric chaos replaces anything resembling grounded thriller logic. But that's only half the picture. A different critical thread recognized exactly what the trench was attempting, and judged it on those terms. These responses focused less on plausibility and more on execution. They praised the film's willingness to push the franchise into stranger territory, noting that few modern blockbusters risk tonal weirdness at this scale. The trench sequences, in particular, drew admiration for atmosphere, tension, and technical confidence. Even skeptics often conceded that the film looked and sounded formidable. Audience reception followed a similar split, though with different fault lines. Viewers who enjoyed the first Meg for its playful absurdity tended to embrace the sequel's excess. For them, the trench delivered exactly what was promised: bigger threats, higher body counts, and set pieces designed to overwhelm rather than impress politely. Online reactions highlighted moments of collective disbelief, the kind that makes people laugh, gasp, and lean toward the screen at the same time. That communal energy matters. It's the lifeblood of spectacle cinema. Others felt alienated by the shift in tone. The sequel is darker, more crowded, and less breezy than its predecessor. Some audience members missed the cleaner simplicity of one shark, one mission, one escalating hunt. For them, the added human antagonists and genre layering diluted the primal appeal. That reaction wasn't about quality so much as alignment. The movie they wanted and the movie they got weren't the same. Social media amplified both camps. Clips of over-the-top moments spread rapidly, often without context, fueling memes and exaggerated reactions. Some posts framed the film as glorious nonsense. Others used the same footage as evidence of excess gone wrong. Interestingly, both responses kept the movie visible. In a landscape where indifference is the real enemy, Meg 2 avoided the worst fate a blockbuster can suffer, being ignored. There was also a noticeable critic-audience gap. Professional reviews tended to scrutinize structure and tone, while general audiences responded more viscerally to spectacle and momentum. That divide isn't new, but the trench widened it. The film doesn't ask to be analyzed gently. It asks to be experienced forcefully. Viewers willing to meet it on those terms often left satisfied, even exhilarated. Culturally, the film reinforced an emerging trend: globalized blockbuster storytelling that prioritizes visual language over verbal nuance. Its strongest reception came in markets where scale, action, and clear stakes matter more than dialogue-driven complexity. That isn't a weakness. It's a strategic identity. Meg 2 knows where it plays best and leans into that arena unapologetically. Awards attention was never part of the conversation, and that's fine. This is industrial cinema, not prestige bait. Its legacy won't be measured in trophies, but in whether studios continue funding high-concept creature features that dare to get weird instead of safe. In that sense, The Trench occupies an interesting cultural niche. It's not universally loved, but it's unmistakably distinct. Over time, films like this often benefit from reassessment. Initial resistance softens once expectations recalibrate. What feels excessive in the moment can later feel refreshingly unrestrained. The sequel's commitment to escalation, once controversial, may become its defining trait, especially as franchise films grow increasingly risk. Ultimately, the cultural response to Meg 2, The Trench reflects a movie that chose personality over consensus. It didn't aim to please everyone. It aimed to push forward, deeper, louder, stranger. Some followed. Some didn't. But nobody walked away unsure of what it was trying to do. And that clarity, love it or hate it, sets the stage for the final conversation. Because once the noise fades and the water settles, the real question remains. What does Meg 2, The Trench, actually mean within the genre, the franchise, and the careers of those who made it?